keeping you connected and protected.
Welcome to DAS Talk, the essential podcast on distributed antenna systems and in-building communication. Hosted by Peter, VP of Gamma, and Philip Nicholas. This Gamma Electronic series focuses on emergency response and safety. Join us as we navigate the challenges of building effective communication systems for North America's first responders. We delve into the advancements in emergency responder radio systems and the transformative impact on new technologies. Tune in for insightful discussions aimed at increasing knowledge and awareness in the DAS field. Whether you're a professional or an enthusiast, DAS Talk is your gateway to understanding the nexus of technology, safety, and communication.
Hey guys, what's up? This is Peter with Gamma, and welcome to our next episode of DAS Talk. I'm very excited as always to be here with you today, and all my friends who come and join us and listen to us discuss DAS and ERCES and our passion and some of our favorite things to talk about, at least for those who are in this industry and those who are related to this industry. I'm excited to have Gil Martinez with us today. He's also here with Gamma, and we've got Chris Cisco with us today with Bearcom. Hi, Chris.
How you guys doing today?
Chris, good to have you on, man.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. So, Chris, I want to give you a minute. I'd love to hear about, what you're doing, how you got to where you are. I know you're an RF DAS engineer, but please tell us about your background, where you came from, how you got to, designing DAS and ERCES and all that kind of stuff, please.
It's been an interesting journey, to say the least. I kind of broke into communications when I first joined the military. Right. I didn't really have any intention of joining the military as far as the communications realm. And before I joined the military, I didn't even own a computer. I didn't even have a cell phone. I was not a tech guy. I knew how to use a computer. That was about it. Played some video games growing up like most of us, but I wasn't a big tech person. But when I did join the military, one of the things that was recommended to me was the communications and signal world. So it sounded like something that could really position me for success in the future, something that was really relevant in the industry today. So I went and kind of went full swing on it. Got a lot of education in my time there, traveled the world, got to meet a lot of different nations, a lot of different militaries, work with their equipment, lots of training, a lot of schoolhouse training. And just that's where I kind of broke in. I met some really intelligent people while I was in that taught me a lot about the world of communications. And military communications is a completely different world. I'll say that. But I got a lot of that information from them. And once I deviated away from that and my time was up in the military, the very first step was I actually became an instructor for a government contractor because I had a natural ability to teach that I learned about in the military. But I took all that information that I've learned from my time in the military, all the different equipment, all the different things that I learned on my way, and did structured training for a lot of government contractors. And it was kind of fairly simple because I was training the very same folks that I was in the military with. So it was all second nature to me. I'd already seen the equipment. I've already had the exposure. Now, no longer in the military, I was just teaching soldiers just like I did when I was still in. So I did that for quite a few years, broke into that. And then I wanted to pursue something different, maybe more in the engineering role, something that was a lot more hands-on, because I kind of like to evolve, right? I don't like to stick in something for so long that just gets monotonous over time. I wanted to kind of expand on my ability and my knowledge, and education for me is a big thing. But that's when I applied to become a systems technician for Bearcom in the Houston region, fourth largest city in the world. I know there's probably a lot of opportunity there with communications being in oil and gas market, a lot of different manufacturers. There's so many things here, so many different communications needs here. So I started at Bearcom about 8 years ago, and I started actually as a two-way technician. And I started assisting with the installation and implementation of different two-way systems, Motorola platforms, trunking systems, vehicle installations, large-scale systems in oil and gas. And that's kind of where I broke into the commercial market. And that's kind of where I transitioned from the knowledge of military communication to civilian communication, which are not the same. And there was quite the learning curve.
If I could ask you real quick,
Sure.
what's what your opinion is the biggest difference between military communication and civilian communication in general?
I would say the support system in the commercial sector as opposed to the military, because the military is constantly changing, but not only is it changing, you're the be all end all in an organization, right? While there is some support, you're kind of on your own. They trust you enough to figure it out, to get your hands dirty, make it happen. If your communications, if it plugs into a wall, if it has some connectivity, we need you to figure out how to make it work. But the biggest benefit for me in the civilian world, in the civilian communications world, was the amount of support and experienced folks that were out there doing this for a very long time that I had the privilege of working with. When you're in the military, you get assigned to an organization, and depending on how many people are assigned to that organization, whether they're talented or have experience or not, you're it. You got to figure it out. Figure it out. And that actually helped me. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but some of those values and some of those experiences in the military are exactly what helped pave my way to get where I am now, through that sense of never quitting, always figuring it out, and doing everything you can to get that answer, which is exactly what I do now as an engineer. You know, we just can't quit. We just can't say, hey, I don't know about this or how to figure this out. You got to do your research. You got to get the right people involved, and you have to come up with an answer. So it actually worked out for me and strengthened my ability.
And I think too, Chris, that I feel like in our industry too, there's a lot of that, still like not necessarily being the lone wolf, but, having to kind of figure it out on your own. Right. So it's great, like for Peter and I too, with kind of doing the podcast or just everything that we're doing, trying to create that sense of community, because there are a lot of people out there that just don't know. They just don't know what they don't know.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I feel like there's still a lot of that, I guess lone wolf mentality, but not in a bad way, but I just don't have a choice. So I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to get the help I need or just do it myself. But I just love the fact, like you're talking about, there's that sense of community where you can learn. There are people that you can, that are willing to share what they know. And
yes,
instead of just keeping it cloistered and silent.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah. That's exactly what happened to me when I first started. The entire time I was a two-way technician in the company, I was approached by some of my management team, and they said, hey, we're getting a lot of requests for this DAS. What's DAS? What is that? I don't know what that is. Well, it's like a repeater. Well, okay. Sure, maybe I can figure it out. If it's like a repeater, I got a pretty solid background on two-way communications. Well, once I kind of got my hands dirty, lo and behold, I realized how much more complex the world was with in-building communications, whether it was public safety, cellular, two-way. And like you just said, if you don't know, you don't know. Well, I really didn't know. I didn't know what DAS was. They needed someone to perform it, me being me. Yeah, let's do it. Let's learn DAS. And that's when I kind of cut my teeth on it, because you just get thrown in, right? Sometimes it's the best way. How do you perform? You get your experiences, whether it's trial, error, learning the hard way. And what I did was I kind of gathered as much resources as I could. I started doing a lot of net searches, but back then, before things like DAS Talk, before the podcast, before a lot more of the safer building stuff that's kind of exploded over the years, before the different testing companies, before the AHJs were really educated, it was really hard to find information and to know how to do things, because just like you said, Gilbert, you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't know, you can't hold yourself or anybody else accountable because they don't know. We just don't know what to do. But through due diligence, I networked with the right folks. I started calling different companies, trying to figure out who had some kind of training, calling manufacturers. And I think the biggest benefit for me and the golden goose for me was a phone call I made to ETA. I'm sure you're all familiar with ETA, the Electronic Technician Association. They do a lot of certified electronics training and a plethora of other different communication certifications. But I called them one day and they said, hey, we're going to get you in touch with somebody that actually specializes with that. And they got me in touch with the right people. And I started to kind of understand and get a really good educational plan together. And the rest was history. And here we are. We're in it.
So, I mean, what I'm getting from the situation is that you're very much a self-made and self-taught.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
RF DAS engineer. I mean,
yes.
Which in itself is like, I'm impressed, right? Because
I appreciate that.
You've gone through a lot of steps in your life. You're a young guy, man. I mean, you're a young guy. It's not like, you've got like 30 years of experience in the DAS world. You know what I'm saying? So
yes, sir.
You're a young guy, and because of that, it's like you've been very, very resourceful. And that's what it sounds like to me. You're very resourceful, and you were able to basically take the lead and navigate through all these challenges when it comes to DAS and figure out how to educate yourself. That's kind of tough, man.
It wasn't easy. It wasn't, I know that conversation took a minute and a half, but it wasn't a minute and a half journey. It was a combination of a lot of trial and error, calling the right people, meeting people over time, learning the hard way. And while all that was going on, this is still at a time where in my area, a lot of the AHJs, the license holder, they were still inexperienced with public safety and in building DAS. So it was still a challenge to try to reach out to them to get some of that information because they were still growing with the industry as well. Making those right contacts and meeting those right people to do this the right way kind of had a domino effect in that because I was learning the right procedures and how to proceed with this the proper way while I was still in the field, opened up a door to a lot more opportunity because I started to earn the respect and confidence of a lot of people, a lot of the AHJs, a lot of fire marshals that I met. And while they were learning, we developed those relationships of trust to where I kind of picked their brain from a code standpoint and they picked my brain from a technical standpoint. And there was a lot of AHJs that I got really familiar with and started working with close hand because of that want for information. And that's when I realized there's a lot of people out there that want the information in what we do. It's just very challenging to know where to go and where to get it. You can find manufacturers, you can find a lot of the vendors, but the best practices, how do you do this right? How do you conduct the site walks and the grid test and walking and designing and learning the software and all that experience? Where do you get that from? And the reality of it was, for me, you've got to network. You've got to constantly put the feelers out there. You've got to search. I've looked on everything from, platforms like LinkedIn, searching vendor websites, different communications threads, just scrounging around anywhere I could to find the right people that were doing this and said, hey, my name is so-and-so. I do DAS. Would you like to teach me what you know? And I'll teach you what I know. And then snowballed. Kind of the very fundamental of this podcast with meeting Gilbert at Safer Buildings. I met somebody that was in this industry, wanted to improve it, wanted to increase the knowledge of our community. And this is proof right here in this podcast of that conversation.
So those are some great concepts and great ideas. I love it because you're kind of outlining some of the challenges I think the industry has as a whole, right?
Absolutely.
So because your experience is one of dozens, hundreds of guys who kind of walk through this and they try to navigate and figure this out on their own. And it's really tough. But I wanted to bring up a quick experience I had because
Sure.
You brought up something as like AHJs are learning or trying to learn as they go through this. So Gil and I, we just attended Texas Fire Marshals Association not too long ago. We were there. We were there with Phil, another team member of ours, and so we had the big conference that happened. I don't know if you attended that or not.
I did not.
You did
Not that one.
Okay. So there were over 300, maybe 400 fire marshals there. All obviously are one way, shape, or form are an AHJ doing code enforcement. And so during the conference, we had many walk through the trade show area where we had our booth up, and we were talking to many of them. And I cannot tell you off the top of my head how many walked by and they did not know what a DAS was. They did not know what ERCES was.
Absolutely.
And there was one gentleman who walked by, and I had a really in-depth conversation with him. And this one was really poignant. And I really think it's important to share on this podcast, and you can have your feedback. And Gil, you could also have your feedback too. So I was talking to an AHJ, and he was along the border of Texas. And he said, we are building out the wazoo down there. We have warehouses and construction always going on. And he said, our team members, we've just become accustomed to when we walk in buildings, our radios don't work. And I just thought that's the way it was supposed to be. And that's what he said while we were there. And I was like, so you're telling me, he's like, we would get calls at this particular school district. I don't recall what school district it was. He said on a weekly, it was a tougher area. So he's like, we're going out all the time. For EMS, and our police are also going out all the time. We're getting calls to this school district, and we are just accustomed to not being able to communicate. Once we go to this certain areas within the school, it's just done. And it's a problem, but I didn't think that it was a problem that could even be resolved. Then he went on to say, he talked about these massive warehouses and other construction projects he had going down there. Same thing. We walk into these warehouses that we're going into. I just thought our radios were supposed to not work. And I was like flabbergasted at that. And I was like, how long have people been talking about DAS and ERCES at this point in time? I don't know, 10, 12, maybe 15 years. We talk about the birth of this being at 9/11, right? Where this kind of started, and maybe even sooner than that, right? But that's like one of the major catastrophic events where this kind of got going. And then here we are all these years later, and I'm still running into HJs who I don't even know what a DAS or an ERCES is. And I said, that was a mic drop moment, a blow my mind moment where I said, oh my goodness. I said, what are we doing? I said, never has there ever been a better need for a podcast where you can get guys on to talk about communications in buildings, to address these challenges, and to get the word out about, oh my goodness, you know what? It's really not that expensive to put one of these systems in. And it's difficult, it's challenging, but there's a lot of resources to get it done. And you know what? We need to start requiring it. And by the way, there's multiple different codes that require you to do that you just don't even know about. Right. Or if you know about them, you don't care about them. I don't know which way it is. It kind of blows my mind the more I talk to people about this, and I wonder what's going on here. So I don't know, maybe you guys could elaborate on that. Gil, Chris, tell me what's going on in that kind of scenario.
Well, from an engineering and field perspective, what I can say is I use my island terminology, but there seems to be folks that are knowledgeable in clusters. But I still feel like where we are right now in our industry, the information just hasn't made it full effect yet. I know we have the safer buildings route, which is an invaluable asset to license holders, system integrators, you name it, right? We have those entities out there, but I think the hardest challenge right now is still disseminating that information. The information is out there, right? We have this trove of information, whether you're seeking information on testing, code compliance, training, certification, best practices with installs. The information is out there and people are funneling and putting so much effort into that. But I still feel like our highway to get that information to these people is lacking. I think too many people just don't know where to go. I was in that position. The information was there this whole time. You know, it was there. The vault was there. I just needed the map of how to get to it so I can open the door. Luckily, I was fortunate enough for me being in, Houston, one of the fourth largest cities in the country. But at the same time, where I am in my industry and in this city, there's a far bigger likelihood that I'm able to meet and network with people in this city as opposed to somebody in a small county in Louisiana or Nebraska or the middle of nowhere United States that recognizes they have the same problems because they are license holders. They do have systems. The information just has not migrated to them as quickly. And I think the only way we can do that as an industry is to remain diligent and continue to try to do things like this podcast, like safer buildings, like the vendors and manufacturers do, and constantly push. It's not going to be an overnight thing, but what I can say is we are leaps and bounds from where we were even 5, 6, 7 years ago. And it's getting there. It's not going to be overnight, but the industry is growing. The right people are taking notice. We have the right people in the right places. It just has to grow. We've got to give it time to grow. And we do that by fostering these relationships with the people that don't know, because it's far more likely someone that doesn't know is not going to find you. You have to actively go find the people that don't know. It's easier for us that do know to go to them. I know there's people out there that want the information because I was one of them. We have more experience and knowledge to go find those that don't know, as opposed to people who are just trying to get by and do what they can. And I think that's our responsibility as people in this industry, to do it right and educate. And if we can do that, it'll get better, a lot better.
Yeah, no, I agree with you a lot, Chris. And I was thinking too, in terms of, I don't know, with the education piece of it, but then also, I don't even know how to describe, just like we were talking earlier, you don't know what you don't know. And
Right.
so kind of like there's this veil. And to your point, how do you find out that information? Are you Googling it? I think things like safer buildings are great. And I feel like a lot of what we're doing, and that's what's interesting, I find with this industry too, is there's a bigger picture to it, right? We're trying to keep people safe. We're trying to keep our first responders safe, tenants, children in schools, all these different things. But there's also a business aspect of it too. So It's
Absolutely.
interesting that obviously people are in business to make money, but there's a bigger picture to it. So it's almost like, why not be part of that bigger picture community in
Absolutely.
order to make people safer? So I think it's a really interesting position to be in because, I work for a BDA manufacturer, and of course you want to sell BDAs. And, but if you don't need it in that given situation, then you just don't need it. But I think, to your point with the education piece, it is tough. There's so many, Peter and I meet so many people, on a weekly, if not daily basis, and they just don't have information. They don't know anything about what the cable is that's run on these things, the amplifiers. They're just kind of, whether it's through, their management or whoever that, we're going to put in these systems. And they're just like, what do I do? I mean, what's a BDA?
It can be
and so
overwhelming.
for us, I know, yeah, and I feel like with, kind of with what Gamma's trying to do or the podcast or what have you, it's very slow. It's almost like one person at a time. But to your point, over the last 5 or 6 years, things are vastly different. There's so much more information out. And I just think, what are the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years going to hold as things, you have more information that's available, as it's enforced more, as maybe there's a better standard that even it's in the code, but that there's a standard that people really will follow. So it's exciting. It's an exciting time. I always, anytime I talk to somebody who's younger and they're trying to figure out what to do, and I'm always asking them, are you familiar with the wireless world at all? Are you familiar with, RF? And of course, it goes over their heads. They don't know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But it's hard because then they ask me, well, where do I learn about this stuff? And it's always this pause. Yeah. And you're like, well, I can send you some videos. I can find you some stuff on YouTube. I'll tell people about, DAS Talk. I said, I could recommend you watch, and listen to the information, but that's what's tough. It's like, we're opening a trade school here in Colorado Springs, and they won't be offering anything similar to this, but it's like, where would they go? Where it's just, they're interested. You've piqued their interest. It's a great industry to be a part of. Like you're saying, there's so much that you can learn in kind of this career path, that you could start, in the field as a technician, whatever, and work your way up because it's very organic. But yeah, where do people go?
So it's a funny question I'll ask you, Chris, and this
Mhm.
kind of ties into what we're talking about here. I think it's kind of funny. So, how often do we get the question of, hey, Chris, so what do you do for work? Or, hey, Gil, so what do you do? What's your employment? And then it's always, for me, it's always this kind of like, I pause for a minute because I'm like, how do I explain to this guy what I do?
Right.
It's like the elevator pitch of all elevator pitches. I've got like 3 sentences where I've got to
Right.
condense everything that I need to unpack. And I know I'm from the OEM perspective, but they don't really want to know so much about cable and where does it go and connectors and what do they do with them and how does RF propagate and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They don't want to know about that. So, of course, if you were a fireman, you could just say it in one word. Oh, I'm a fireman, or I'm a fire
Fireman.
chief,
Got it.
or right. But so,
Right.
Chris, so what do you do for a living?
So what I tell people flat out, I make things like radios in your cell phone work in a building when you don't have coverage. And you can talk to somebody and you can go down the public safety route and they're kind of like, well, I don't know what that means. You start talking about fire code. Okay, thanks. Bye. You lose
It goes
them.
over their heads.
But,
Yeah.
but we live in an age where everyone is like this, right? Everyone is like this or has one of these at some way, shape, or form. If you tell somebody in a sense that you make sure this works when they go in a building, oh, that's awesome. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's true. Well,
Then it
what's funny
changes.
is living here in Colorado Springs. I mean, we have, 2 Air Force bases, an Army base. We have a lot of friends that work on, secret stuff. Who knows what it is? It's like, hey, how was your day?
Right.
Fine. They can't. So whenever people ask me what I do, it's kind of to your point, Peter, I pause because I'm like, how can I explain this? And then within like literally a second or two, people are like, oh, you must work like, at Schriever Air Force Base. You must do some secret stuff. I'm like, no. What I do isn't secret. And essentially, like what you're saying, Chris, we make cell phones and first responder radios work inside buildings. And
Right.
most people are just like, okay, it just doesn't resonate. Like, I sell, something, flashy and sexy or something. And, oh, that's awesome. Tell me more about it. But it's
Right.
just interesting. But I tell people that when your kids are in school, if there's an event and their first responder radios work, it's because they have a system in. It's because of the industry that we're part of
And
that keeps your kids safe. And then they're
that
just
right
like,
there, Gilbert, I didn't mean to cut you off. That right
no,
there
no.
is the biggest thing for me, right? When you look at the world of public safety, the average person, unless you have exposure to this industry, it's completely just not thought about and kind of almost taken for granted, right?
Yeah.
When you get into a major accident and law enforcement and EMTs are there immediately, it's because of that communications backbone. When you have a fire in your home and they can respond, it's because of that backbone. If you're in a high rise building with major fires and issues, because of that communications, God forbid you have a tragedy in a school. And we've seen the repercussions of not having this type of system in those buildings. That's because of the communications backbone. And what I tell people is like the most rewarding thing for me in this is being a part of something that is so important to the infrastructure of our country. It's not just a state or a single city. It's everywhere. And one of the reasons why I was so concerned about the right training and the right information and doing things the right way when I was progressing through my career and becoming an engineer was I realized more than just selling the BDA, we've got to do this right and only right, because the repercussions of not far outweigh the risk of doing it well. You can bring down these tower sites. You can have a faulty system, and when it's used to save a life and it doesn't work, that could be you. That could be your family member, somebody you care about. So it is a very rewarding industry, but it has to be kept with high levels of integrity. And I think as the industry builds and grows, to kind of caveat of what we were talking about earlier, where people go, if we have the people that continually do the right thing hold the industry accountable for doing things the right way and the proper way, whether it be the install, commissioning, design, AHD documentation. When we start to get experienced individuals in this industry that excel at tying that together, I think those people are going to be kind of like the pioneers in our industry to really set the standards of how this industry should go and on its trajectory. That's what I think. But right now, it's still not quite infancy, but it's still a baby. And the right people out there are still being developed. And once they finally meet each other, network, get this education, and they kind of become those pioneers, those are the people that are going to lead our industry where it needs to be and clean up a lot of the issues that we're seeing.
So you brought up some good points about priorities, right? Because I think priorities are really important. And so one of the questions I ask, and I'll preface this with a statistic. So from what I've seen, more than 50% of K through 12 buildings in the United States do not have in-building communication systems for ERCES.
100%. I deal with that every day.
So, and maybe it's more in certain regions, maybe in more remote regions, it's a much higher percentage. I'd probably venture to say out of larger urban areas and larger cities, it's probably next to nil, right? And you can have huge schools that aren't in Houston, that aren't in Dallas, that aren't in New York City and major metropolitan areas, but they're out remotely. And these probably don't have a in-building DAS system. From my perspective, for me, it's also about children. It really is about keeping them as safe as we can. Of course, 100%. The environment in the world that we're in right now, it's kind of always in the back of our minds. I have 4 children, so I can't help but think about that when they go off to school every day. The work that I do impacts their ability to be safe in a safe environment. And I think that message resonates with people. And that's what's going to help attract them. So I feel like one of the priorities should be is making schools safe. I really do. And that would be the priority. And then we can kind of segue from there. So if we're below 50, I don't know, I've graded papers before, and I've been in college, right? And if you're below 50%, that's not even a passing grade. That's not even close, right? So close passing grade would be 65%. But even if you're on the other side of the coin where let's just say it's 55, 58%, and you're on the other side of the coin where your kid's going to a school that doesn't have a DAS, where I know my kids go to one that doesn't, because there's no cellular connectivity, not even a drop in that school. Oh, yeah. I mean, it falls off a cliff the second you walk in, and it does concern me that my kids can't even get a text message out when things are going down. And there was an incident that just happened that you wouldn't believe. So my son's, I believe it was his English teacher, actually died in class.
Wow.
The morning of. Kids lined up outside of his room and couldn't get in. And he had slumped over dead on the desk.
Wow.
Right? And he died from, I believe it was a heart attack or a stroke. We still don't know exactly why he passed away. It was a terrible, terrible thing.
Yeah.
And this is just something that can happen anytime. Yet the school doesn't have a DAS and doesn't have an ERCES, and there's literally no communication going in and out. Absolutely. And to me, that's scary. Last year at the same school, there was a kid from another school district who showed up, and I think it was probably gang related or something. Who knows? He brandished a gun at the school. Okay, no one was shot. He got into a little fisticuff thing. They were fighting, and then he brandished a gun as part of his initiation. Who knows? It wasn't even from this school. He just came from one other school and showed up. So this was an emergency situation, and here I am thinking like, wow. And the school buildings itself, it's a high school, and it's a wild design on the school, and there's buildings all over the place. They're kind of tall, they're kind of high. And you just know based upon RF, it's just not getting in there. It's just not communicating. No. And if you ever have to go to the very back of the school where the football field is, again, there's no communication. So how are first responders and even teachers going to be able to communicate out of the school without the right system being put in there? So we fund a lot of things in this country, right? But we do not fund enough to, in any way, shape, or form, to keep our kids, our teachers and our kids safe. And I'm sorry, that needs to be a priority, and it should 100%. Be a priority of our message, right? And that's like one part, and then the other part comes from like all the other buildings too. But it's just one of those things that's close to my heart.
No, I agree. If I could give a priority, number one on my list, like you said, schools. I get design requests for schools more than any other vertical in this industry. And unfortunately, when those incidents do happen, it takes an incident like that to happen to get the attention of the right people every time. There's been a very low sense of urgency with in-building communications in that vertical until unfortunately something really bad happens. And what I try to do in a lot of the different school districts that I work with, I try to explain to them it's going to be far more worse if there's an incident that could have been prevented or something could have greatly been reduced in severity if you would have just had a system and knew you needed one, than if you decided not to do it and there was an incident and now you have to make a public address to the school district of why this happened. But regarding in-building coverage, I've explained to the schools more than just the public safety, because in most of our schools today, we see, at least here in Texas and some other school districts I work with, there's typically some roving officer in a lot of schools today, in many of them that I have worked with. So yes, they do need communications, but those officers are also typically communicating on a channel on the school's radio system that they have to monitor incidents, because the school's not going to own a P25 radio that's on a system, right? It's just not going to happen. We know it's not going to happen, security reasons and what have you. So they are on those channels. Sometimes those two-way radio systems perform poorly in the school district because of bad design or bad practices. But most importantly, what I tell the schools is, even, following the safer buildings model, look at one of the major pillars, 911 calls. It's going to be almost a 100% chance that when there's an emergency in a school, it's going to go straight to 911. Students are going to run and call 911. Teachers are going to call 911. And cellular in a school is almost as important or more important with cellular communication than the fundamental ERCES, because they have no way of getting that initial message out. They're going to have to either leave the building or some other method to get a hold of somebody to communicate, to even let them know that there's an emergency or a major illness or a death or a shooting or something crazy. And it all ties together. And I think, like you said, school is number one on my list, because incidents, unfortunately, are growing because of the world we live in. But we also live in this information age where everyone has a cell phone, and there's many areas where it just doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, I can't tell you that I have a problem. So schools, number one on my list, for sure.
So I'm glad we're on the same page on that. I mean, that was, and it's not like this was pre-planned. I did not talk to Chris beforehand. And by the way, let's go coordinate what we think the priority of the industry should be.
Right.
I mean, that did not happen. So I don't know, man. Like to me, it seems like we've done really well, and I agree with you. I just feel like there's a lot more that we can do as far as the industry as a whole. Now, from your design, I'm just curious. What are some of the biggest problems that you've seen in just, talking to people when it comes to design? Was there like something that kind of clicks in your mind that this is a consistent problem with designers
Absolutely.
or designing it? Maybe you can help us out with some of that.
Absolutely. The biggest thing for me, and I've discussed this with other engineers in other companies. I've discussed it with OEMs, manufacturers. It's unanimous. The biggest thing for me when identifying the need for an ERC system is the proper assessment and evaluation of the building. And while there is much to be desired with the way we can do things, I believe that we're not getting the information at the engineering level that we should to integrate a proper system. We harp on things like grid tests, the manufacturers, PCTEL, the folks out there, IB Wave, all these test scanner folks. They talk about the importance of the grid test, right? But reviewing a lot of grid tests that come across my desk, even from third-party integrators, low voltage companies, not just from my company, from a lot of different people, 90% of them are done wrong. Completely wrong. Because what they're focusing on is they're focusing on downlink. And sometimes that, all the time really, it doesn't tell the complete story, right? If I do a grid test and I say my downlink looks outstanding, I meet all your system requirements, my bit error rate, my signal to noise, everything is great based on the technology that the AHJ is using. Great. Okay. Did you use radios and key up in the building? No. Okay. So I have a 50% chance that the downlink's going to work, but my uplink side is bad, because there have been many times where I've seen passing grid tests in a building only for the AHJ to go back out, key, and you can't make that affiliation to the tower site, because that's why we call it a bi-directional amplifier, and too many people are doing this one-way grid test that I'm seeing. But the other piece of that is not having the information from the AHJ. And while I understand there's a lot of AHJs that are new, they don't know what they don't know, but you've at least got to try do your due diligence, make that handshake and get that information. I mean, I've seen things where a lot of third-party integrators and low voltage folks they're getting their information third hand from things like Radio Reference. So Radio Reference is a third-party information site, which isn't always accurate. It's open source. You're not getting that information. You're not getting the tower site locations. You're not conducting the grid test correctly. And even inside the building, understanding the makeup of the building. We talked about schools. A lot of these new manufactured schools, just like other buildings, low E-glass everywhere, completely dead. The building is dead. We need to know that information. A lot of the older buildings, concrete slab, old cinder block, filled. I've had schools that are filled sand lined, like old bomb shelter type schools. That information is absolutely imperative when we get it from these guys in the field, because that is going to dictate a sound design, whether it be from our uplink calculations back and what donor site we're going to use, how many channels, what the building's made of, because that completely dictates antenna density. There's so many different things that an engineer requires to get back. And I think, again, because it's just this revolving door of what we're talking about, it's education, and developing that. We have manufacturer training. You can click on any manufacturer and find out exactly how to commission that. You can look at any of the test equipment and find training on how to do it. What is very challenging to find, and on my end, is where's the training for the rubber meeting the road? Where's that training to show the people that are, and I can appreciate the folks in the field because I came from that world, and it is a very demanding industry. It's a very demanding process to do these installs. But where is the rubber meet the road type of training with the industry practices, sweeping lines, conducting PIM tests, testing connectors, knowing how to do your traces, proper commissioning, understanding the noise floor, understanding FCC, right? We talk a lot about the NFPA and IFC, but very, very few people talk about the FCC regulations that govern boosters. Are you compliant there? So that's what I'd like to see in our industry, really a structured system of helping these guys in the field and really showing them what they need to do, because their job is just as vital as somebody doing the engineering work. Just because they're in the field does not take away from how important it is to get that information. And that's what I'd like to see change for me.
So I was going to ask you, Chris, so where are people getting that information now?
They're getting it from what experienced people they can find. I get a lot of phone calls myself from friends that I've made in the industry, younger technicians, because I've always tried to have a pay it forward mindset, right? A lot of people help me coming up, and I do not want to hold that information. If I hold that information, then what good is our industry going to get, right? So the more people that I can help and people to reach out, I will do the best I can to either give you the answer, explain to you what would need to happen or put you in contact with somebody that I know can tell you the right way. But a lot of people just fly by the seat of their pants, man, and they do the best they can. It's not really the right answer because it can have repercussions, but it's just the way it is for some people. You know, they can't control it. They've been given an assignment. They have a project to do because at the end of the day, these integrators are still a business, and the business's job is to generate revenue. So they're doing the best they can with what they have. But I think experienced people like us, and the more we're out there and we can put our faces and credibility out there, people will know who they can turn to get this information, because I truly believe there are people out there that want to do it right. They just don't know where to go.
Yeah, I agree with you.
That's man, I can't emphasize your points even more. I mean, you did a great job at articulating that, kind of outlining some of the challenges. Yet, I think all in all, there's a lot of bright spots that we've gone over in this podcast today.
Absolutely.
So, Chris, if someone wanted to reach out to you, they had a question about, some of the DAS stuff you've talked about or RF, could they reach you on LinkedIn, or where could they reach you? Because you talked about mentoring and kind of helping other people, or what would be a good place to get in touch with you?
I live, sleep, eat, and breathe this stuff. I love discussing it. I love working on it. It's kind of one of those things where, like, I was fortunate enough. I found a career path that I love. Like, it's never miserable for me. Is it a challenge? Absolutely. But I love it. And if there's anybody out there that needs a little bit of information, a training plan, or how to do something, you can reach me on LinkedIn. It's Christopher Cisco, Cisco, my last name. And then my email is Christopher.L, like an L, Lima, .cisco@gmail.com. If you have a question, you need to get in contact with somebody, I'll do whatever I can to help to make sure we improve our industry every day with what we do.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Gil. This has been a fantastic episode. We had some very enlightening conversation, and it's been wonderful. And I'd love to have you on again sometime, Chris.
Absolutely.
If Bearcom or you've got any kind of cool news or new things you want to tell the industry, this is a really great way to do it and a really easy way to do it too. So thank you for being with us. And Gil, thanks for being with us today. I appreciate your guys' time.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chris.
Take care, guys. Thanks, everyone.
DAS Talk by Gamma, keeping you connected and protected.